If you've been around the indie horror scene for as long as I have, you probably grew up on games like Slender the Eight Pages, Amnesia, and eventually Five Nights at Freddy's. Of course, being the series I mostly dedicated my channel to, you can guess I have a certain fixation on it. However, it's not like it's the only game I ever play, it just happens to be one of the only modern indie horrors I actually like. Time and time again, you can see companies try and mostly fail to ride FNAF's coattails, bright mascots, and hidden lore behind the madness. In the early days, you had the relatively inoffensive games like 1-2-3 Slaughter Me Street. Sure, it wasn't very original, or good, but it was pretty much the first time any game tried to be the next FNAF. Then you have Bendy, which, okay, is not much of a FNAF clone, but I absolutely attribute a lot of Bendy's success to it being a mascot-based horror game with plenty of lore. Then there's Hello Neighbor, which hardly counts as a mascot horror, but I like bringing it up because it's just the worst example of a company trying to really get its footing in the theory crafting crowd. We've all seen the MatPat tweets by now, and for a while I considered Hello Neighbor to be bottom of the barrel. Then someone cut the bottom out and kept digging. Piggy and Rainbow Friends are two games that are hosted on Roblox, and they're games I can confidently say were made either just for money and toys, or to be recognizable to children and flood the YouTube algorithm. I have no shame in saying this, and I bet the devs don't either. But it got even worse with what I considered to be the ultimate mascot horror game, Poppy Playtime. People who know me online know I loathe this game, what it stands for, and its shady development past. This is another game that exists for kids' toys first, horror second. For as bland, unoriginal, and downright not scary Poppy Playtime is though, it has unmistakable quality woven into every model, every frame, and every design. The worst thing about Poppy to me is that just by looking at it, you couldn't really tell that it was a bad game, but the story was pretty much beat for beat lifted from Bendy. The monsters were designed with merch in mind, and the main gameplay comes down to being puzzles for puzzles' sake. And even still, I can't call Poppy Playtime the worst mascot horror game ever. Not when Garten of Banban exists. So take every bad thing I said about Poppy Playtime and apply it here, and then remove the part where I said that Poppy had quality. And there you go, that's Banban for you. What is Garten of Banban, you may wonder? It's a horror game available for free on Steam, which is a good thing. If anyone paid money for this, I'd think they should be declared criminally insane. Upon booting up Garten of Banban, you get the absolute worst thing you can see on any immediate boot up page: a merch store. This is something that Poppy did as well, truly inspired by the greats this is. The game itself takes place in a kindergarten, probably because that's one of the few places where children's mascots can be present that hasn't been done already. But I mean, like, guys, amusement parks, theme parks, they exist, but I guess no one wants to render a skybox. When you start, you're locked in a room. Great. Go grab the drone you'll need to progress and the magically spawning batteries. Hit the button up top, now it's time for the real game to begin. And, oh, you will get to you. After turning the lights on in the big indoor playground, gather up all the eggs to feed the Opila bird. I looked up what Opila means. It's a Basque word that means the cake. I'm not sure that's what it's actually supposed to mean in this context, but whatever, cake bird. After feeding Opila bird, take the keycard, go over here, smash the glass with the world's slowest drone, retrieve the hammer, remove the nails on the doorframe, and come to the bottomless ball pit. That's what it's supposed to be, I guess. I'm not sure the devs have ever actually visited a kindergarten. After riding the ski lift, solve this puzzle thing, and watch as the bird comes to life. And this is where the funny Daco clip comes from. Escape, watch the bird die, and go into this room and wait for the lift. Then descend slowly, watch Jumbo Josh tear the thingy down, end of the game. So, what are we thinking? The merch store is pretty enticing now, I bet. In reality, the game can be beaten in between 5 and 10 minutes, and most of that time is gonna be spent waiting for the slow-ass drone to actually go where you want it to. The hit detections are so wonky and terrible that half the time you can't actually push the button you mean to. Everything about this game just lacks quality. Opila Bird's main mechanic is feeding her eggs, but they didn't even bother to texture the inside of her mouth. Nothing was completely thought through. And even then, maybe the only original parts of this game are the monsters, of which there are two, and of which one of them is the funny bird, and the other is, shape. As I understand, much of this game is just asset flip after asset flip. Nothing fits together like a game with actual artistic direction should. Now, I'm not saying assets aren't useful, but they should be supplemental. Look at a game like Security Breach. That game has a lot of resources and some of it are bought assets, but you can hardly tell most of the time because the game has such a strong artistic direction. There's a sense of unity between almost everything you see in the game, but nothing in Banban looks like it fits together. But I'll admit, it might be a bit disingenuous to compare a game made by a whole studio to a game made by 2 people. So how about some games made with similarly sized teams? Cave Story, Undertale, Axiom Verge, the original version of Stardew Valley, the original version of Minecraft, Iconoclasts. All of these are games developed either solely by one person, or by one person who sometimes had art or other assets made by people not directly working on the game. Or how about Hollow Knight, made by Team Cherry, a team of 3 people. That might be my favorite video game of all time, and it was made by a team that was only one adult human bigger than Banban's development team. And need I remind you of the first 7 FNaF games? My point that I'm trying to make is that just because you're a small team, that doesn't excuse lazy design, or in the case of Banban, no design at all. But maybe what the game lacks in interesting gameplay and design, it can make up for in story. I'd like to say yes or no, but I can't because I can't really find any. You play as a parent looking for their lost child. That's it. Oh, and also there's a secret tape that may or may not be about a certain type of tragedy that I can't talk about, or I risk monetization, and that's about it. Now, there are some scannable QR codes. One brings you to the ever-bumping Jumbo Josh Lounge, but there's really not much else. The fact that I can pretty much count everything in this game on one hand is ridiculous. How many minutes can you beat it in? 5. How many secrets are there? Like 4, depending on what you call a secret. How many eggs do you need to feed Opelabird? 6. It's just not a very meaty game. And then we come to that little teaser in the corner. Now, as far as I know, this wasn't included at launch, but it didn't take long for it to show up. Garten of Banban 2, which is not really a sequel, but a continuation of an incomplete story. What we normal people would call a chapter. Because if you think there's going to be any major differences between chapters 1 and 2, you're mistaken, and maybe delusional. But the only thing I'm wondering is why isn't it out yet? It could just be that the chapter is longer, but I don't know if these devs would actually do that. Speaking of devs, I think it's finally time I talk about them. The Euphoric Brothers. But before I do, I feel it's only my responsibility as a YouTuber to say that you shouldn't go out and harass these guys. You can hate the game, you might even find the devs to be annoying, but it's never okay to send threats of violence or harassing messages. Alright? Alright. With that being said, these guys are like the most fragile-skinned game devs out there. And if you think they don't know what they're doing, you're sorely mistaken. You see, when Banban first released, it was to little applause. It was destined to be the bad game of the week, and everyone would move on. Maybe Dako would play it if he was feeling generous that day. But that all changed when another FNaF YouTuber, oh yeah, managed to get the phrase bird up trending on Twitter. Suddenly, everyone knew about this dumb pink bird, and the Euphoric Brothers knew they had a success on their hands. People started playing the game, some for fun, but most ironically, just to see that dumb bird. But with this new stream of attention, some of it turned into harsh criticism. People were able to see that this game had little to no effort put into the development, that it was made simply to appeal to kids, and furthermore, how lazy everything was. And the Euphoric Brothers, well, they didn't respond well to criticism. On January 16th, they posted the iconic tweet when a new indie horror game with a main menu gets released, showing a picture of Jumbo Josh and Opelabird about to be hung beside Huggy Wuggy and Blue. Needless to say, the point wasn't just missed, it veered off course into an orphanage. But just by looking at this tweet, you know what they mean. First off, I don't think Rainbow Friends even has a main menu. Why is he here? But second, people ridiculed Poppy and Banban not for having a main menu, but for having one that linked you immediately to a goddamn money farm. And all of this ultimately culminated in 2 decisive actions by the Euphoric Brothers. The first was to post about the harassment they received, which is fine and totally okay for them to do so. I mean, they could have worded it better and maybe used better examples. I don't really think the quote, "I hope you have a hernia and it ruptures," is meant to be taken as a literal threat of violence. But still, this post isn't something I want to dig at them for. But I do want to dig at them for blocking oh yeah on Twitter. I mean, I said it earlier, but without this Canadian furry, Banban would be nowhere near the size it is now. And instead of making a veritable ally out of the guy who memed their game so hard it blew up, they instead want to keep him as far away from the game as possible. A more Shakespearean tragedy I have never seen. And probably a very dumb move, as it broke arguably their biggest shield from criticism, that being that they're self-aware, that Banban could at the very least be chalked up to parody. But no, the Euphoric Brothers didn't make a parody of indie horror, they just made an indie horror that happened to be so bad people thought it was a joke. And the worst part is that this isn't even the first time they've done this. A while back they released a game called Egghead Gumpty, which is admittedly much more of a horror game, and much more tame in its whole online takeover angle. Is it a good game? Well, I think that comes down to preference. I've heard some say it's monotonous and boring, others that it is a fun challenge. But my point here is that with this game under their belt, it makes Banban's intention as a money printer much more obvious. While one was at least somewhat original, the other is riding not off of FNaF's coattails, but the coattails of Poppy, which is riding off of FNaF's coattails. Truly, indie horror is the most inbred genre. So what's the verdict on Garten of Banban? Does it deserve the hate? Is it overblown? And what about the developers? Well, if you ask me, the hate is totally justified. Not to the extreme levels that we saw in the Euphoric Brothers tweet, but I absolutely think that people are right in calling the game out for what it is. A mindless money machine seeking to appeal to kids and their moms' wallets through merchandise. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Jumbo Josh action figures at Walmart within the year, but still, I cannot wait for Banban 2 to drop, if only because this game being so universally hated has made for some of the best fun. Don't get me wrong, it's bad, but that's what makes it so good. When you're able to have some dumb fun with the lowest common denominator, you will be making memories. I think that Banban is going to continue down its path and truly become not just the worst indie horror game, but the worst indie horror series. I have never seen the FNaF community or the indie horror community as a whole so united in hating one game. You know it's bad when even Markiplier can barely get through an outro after playing, and I don't think I'm going to be able to get through this outro either. So, like and subscribe.